My wife left me for being broke. She packed her designer luggage, took both cars, drained every account with both their names on it, and walked out of their Atlanta home on a Tuesday morning like she was leaving a hotel that had disappointed her. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode may touch a story that is still unfolding. Simone Ashford Carter did not slam the door. That was the part Marcus Carter would remember most, not the words, not the diamond bracelet catching the light as she waved her hand at the boxes stacked against the hallway wall. The door simply closed, a clean, mechanical sound, the sound of a decision already made, already finished, already forgotten. She had paused only once before leaving. She set a single brass key on the granite counter of the kitchen Marcus had designed himself. The key was small, dull, and unremarkable. It belonged to a climate-controlled storage unit in an industrial complex off Fulton Industrial Boulevard in southwest Atlanta. The storage place is paid through the end of the year, she said. Her voice carried no cruelty. It carried something far more devastating, indifference. Keep your little collection in there, all those old files and whatever those models are, sentimental value, I am sure. She did not know that those old files contained the complete, sealed, undisclosed intellectual archive of Kwame Osa, the reclusive visionary engineer and design pioneer whose land rights, sealed patents, and unbuilt architectural frameworks were legally tied to a global development portfolio worth $67 billion. She did not know because she had never asked. She had walked into that storage unit exactly once, 3 years prior. She had stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her nose turned slightly upward, and she had looked at the shelves of archival tubes, locked cabinets, and scale models with the blank, uncomprehending gaze of someone staring at a language they had already decided was beneath them. "This is what you disappear to?" she had asked. "Old paper and toys." 4 words that would become the most expensive sentence she ever spoke. Marcus stood in the emptied kitchen for a long time after the door closed. The silence was different from the silence he had grown used to inside that house. For years the silence had been heavy, loaded with resentment, with the grinding weight of a woman who had decided her husband was a project that had failed. This new silence was clean. It was open. It had space inside it. He walked to the counter. He picked up the brass key. He closed his hand around it slowly, the cool metal pressing into his palm. He was an engineer by training, a builder by soul. He understood that before anything new could rise, the old ground had to be cleared completely. Simone Ashford Carter had just cleared the ground. Marcus Carter looked at the key in his hand and felt, for the first time in years, completely free. The humiliation had not begun the morning she left. It had a longer history than that. It had a setting, a stage, and an audience. 12 months before the door clicked shut, Reginald Ashford hosted his 35th annual Ashford Family Foundation Gala at his Buckhead estate, a towering stone and glass structure perched above the wealthiest corridor in Atlanta, Georgia. The event was catered with the kind of excess that required its own logistics team. The guest list read like a financial directory of black excellence and old Atlanta money. Politicians, developers, tech founders, media executives, all gathered beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna. Marcus had always felt like a display piece at these gatherings. Simone's husband, the quiet one, the one who designed things but had not yet built an empire visible enough to earn Reginald's respect. He stood near the terrace overlooking the garden, holding sparkling water, watching. Reginald found him there. He always did. Reginald Ashford was a large man, broad shoulders, a commanding physical presence built over 40 years of deal-making and dominance. He moved through rooms like a weather system, and when he placed his heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder that evening, it was not a greeting, it was a claim. Marcus Carter hiding from the crowd again. His voice was a low, resonant boom. "Come on now, you are among family." "Just taking in the view, sir," Marcus replied. His voice was even. Reginald laughed, short and dismissive. "Your little engineering firm, still just the two of you over there?" He did not wait for an answer. "Simone tells me you had another slow quarter. Listen, son." He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to create the illusion of privacy. "A man has to produce. My daughter was raised in a certain way. She expects a certain kind of life. What you do, the drafting, the models, all that, it is a fine hobby, admirable even. But a hobby does not build a legacy. Nearby guests had begun to listen. Simone drifted close, her emerald gown catching the light. She did not step in. She offered Marcus a small, apologetic smile, the kind that carried more judgment than words ever could. "You are a sharp man," Reginald continued, his voice rising now, performing for the room. "But sharp without ambition is just a knife that never cuts anything. A man who cannot provide is not a man building a future. He is a man standing in the way of one." The words landed slowly, each one deliberate. Marcus said nothing. His hand found the brass key in his jacket pocket. He had begun carrying it everywhere that year, a private anchor, a reminder of the weight of something real inside a world of polished surfaces and hollow declarations. He nodded once. Reginald mistook it for surrender. He always did. The storage facility sat at the edge of southwest Atlanta. No sign worth reading, no architecture worth admiring. A row of corrugated steel doors set into a long concrete building, surrounded by chain-link fencing and the quiet hum of industrial air conditioning. Unit 734 was at the far end of the row. Marcus slid the brass key into the lock at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after Simone left. The tumblers turned with a clean, mechanical precision he found deeply satisfying. He lifted the steel door slowly and stood at the threshold for a moment before stepping inside. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then held. What they revealed had no business existing inside a storage unit off Fulton Industrial Boulevard. Floor-to-ceiling custom archival shelving ran along 3 walls. Every surface was organized with the kind of disciplined care that spoke of years of patient attention. Acid-free tubes, each labeled in Marcus's own hand, held rolled blueprints and technical drawings. Clear archival boxes contained correspondence, letters, contracts, handwritten notes on yellowed paper. A long work table at the center of the room held 3 scale models under protective glass, each one a physical record of a mind working at a frequency the world had not yet learned to receive. This was the complete archive of Kwame Osei. Kwame Osei had been, in the circles that understood such things, one of the most radical engineering and design minds of the late 20th century. He had produced a small body of landmark work, a water reclamation complex in coastal Ghana, a low-energy mass transit grid proposed for Lagos that was still being studied in graduate engineering programs across 6 continents. Then, at the peak of his international recognition, he had gone silent. He had relocated to Atlanta, spent the final 2 decades of his life in deliberate seclusion, and had chosen Marcus, then a graduate student whose reverence for structural integrity bordered on spiritual, as his sole protege. When Kwame Osei died, he left Marcus no money. He left him everything else. Marcus walked slowly along the shelves. He touched the edge of a tube labeled OSI-07, the original drawings for the Lagos grid, never built, never published. He opened a flat archival box and looked at a page of Kwame's handwriting, dense with calculations and margin notes that argued with themselves in 3 languages. In the locked fireproof cabinet at the rear of the unit sat the documents Marcus had not yet shown anyone. Kwame Osei had not simply left behind drawings and models. He had left behind sealed patent filings across 11 countries. He had left behind land rights documentation for parcels in 4 African nations tied to infrastructure development frameworks that global sovereign funds were, at that precise moment in history, positioned to activate. Marcus had known the weight of what he held. He had been waiting for the right moment. Simone had just given it to him. The woman who arrived at Unit 734 on a Thursday morning carried a leather satchel, a portable humidity gauge, and the composed, unhurried manner of someone who had spent 30 years appraising things the rest of the world had failed to understand. Her name was Dr. Adiz Nwasu. She held dual expertise in intellectual property valuation and historical technical archives. Marcus had been referred to her through a quiet channel, an engineering professor at Georgia Tech who had once studied under Kwame Osei and still spoke his name in a lowered voice, the way people speak about things that feel larger than ordinary language. Dr. Nwasu spent the first hour in silence. She moved through the shelves with slow, methodical attention, removing tubes, unrolling drawings onto the work table, replacing them with the same careful precision. She read Quame's margin notes with her reading glasses on the very end of her nose, her lips moving slightly. She opened the archival correspondence boxes and handled each letter as if it were a living thing. Marcus sat in a folding chair near the door and did not rush her. At 11:30 in the morning, she sat down across from him at the work table. She removed her glasses. She folded her hands in front of her on the table and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on a professional face before, something between reverence and controlled alarm. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I need you to understand what you have here." "Tell me," he said. She began with the archive itself, the drawings, the models, the correspondence. She placed a conservative academic and auction valuation at $9 million for those materials alone. Museums in London, Tokyo, and Accra had been searching for Quame Osai's missing archive for over a decade. The Lagos grid drawings alone would trigger a bidding war. Then she moved to the cabinet. The sealed patents Quame had filed across 11 countries had never been activated, never transferred, never legally abandoned. They were still valid. They covered foundational engineering methodologies now embedded, unknowingly, in infrastructure frameworks being deployed across the African continent by sovereign wealth funds and development banks. "Mr. Carter," her voice was very controlled, "these patents are not historical documents. They are active legal instruments, and the land rights Quame Osai secured in those 4 development corridors, the frameworks your mentor designed and then deliberately held in reserve, those parcels are now at the center of a $67 billion regional development initiative currently being finalized by a consortium of sovereign investors." The room was very quiet. "The entity that holds this archive," she said slowly, "holds the legal key to that entire portfolio." Marcus looked at the brass key sitting on the worktable between them. He had always known this moment was coming. He had simply been building the foundation, brick by quiet brick, until the world was ready to see what was already there. The invitation arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered by hand to Marcus's small apartment near Ponce City Market, thick cream cardstock, embossed with the Ashford family crest, requesting his presence at Reginald Ashford's 36th annual gala. Marcus read it once. He set it on his desk beside the brass key. He understood immediately what it was. It was not a gesture of goodwill. It was a summons constructed to look like one. Simone had moved on publicly and loudly. She was being photographed at Atlanta charity events beside Deshaun Okoye, a private equity director whose wealth was real, recent, and frictionlessly displayed. The Ashford social machine had already begun rewriting the story of Marcus Carter, the quiet, ineffective husband she had wisely left behind. This gala was designed to be the final public chapter of that story. Marcus arriving alone. Marcus being received with the particular brand of charitable pity that wealthy Atlanta families reserve for men who have fallen visibly below expectation. Reginald shaking his hand with that heavy, performative warmth. Simone offering him a glance of benevolent sympathy from across the room, while Deshaun Okoye stood beside her radiating every quality Marcus was supposed to lack. It was a beautiful trap. Marcus accepted the invitation. He wrote his name on the reply card in clean, unhurried handwriting. He sealed the envelope. He placed it in his outgoing mail. Then he sat at his desk in the late afternoon light and opened his laptop. He had 3 emails to send. The first went to Dr. Adiz Nwasu, confirming the completion of the formal valuation report and requesting 2 certified copies of the final document. The second went to Isabel Okafor, his attorney, with a single line, "It is time to move." The third was the longest. It was addressed to the Executive Office of the Meridian Continental Sovereign Fund, the most influential infrastructure investment consortium operating across the African continent, and for the past 3 years, the entity most aggressively seeking legal access to the Quame Osai land rights framework. Marcus had been corresponding with their senior director for 18 months. He had moved slowly, deliberately. He had not rushed to the table before the documents were in order, before the legal architecture was sound, before every piece of the structure was load-bearing. An architect does not pour the foundation while the drawings are still being corrected. The drawings were correct now. He pressed send on the third email at 4:45 in the afternoon. Then he closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the Atlanta skyline catching the last light of the day. the towers of Buckhead and Midtown glowing amber and gold against the darkening sky. He thought about Reginald Ashford's gala, the chandeliers, the champagne, the curated audience. He thought about structure, about staging, about the specific power of choosing the right moment to let a building reveal itself. He was ready. Isabel Ockaffer's office occupied a corner of the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, not the tallest building on that stretch, not the most imposing, but the one with the best light and the most books. Her shelves ran floor to ceiling. Her desk was organized with the precision of someone who understood that detail was not a small thing but the entire thing. She had been Marcus's attorney for 6 years. She had watched, with patient and quiet fury, as the Ashford family had systematically underestimated him. She was not patient anymore. "They sent the final settlement terms yesterday," she said, sliding a document across her desk the moment Marcus sat down. "Read Section 7, Paragraph B." Marcus picked it up. His eyes moved across the page with the focused efficiency of a man who read structural documents for his entire professional life. He found the paragraph. It was 4 sentences long. It described the contents of Storage Unit 734 on Fulton Industrial Boulevard as miscellaneous personal items including papers, documents, hobby materials, and decorative models possessing sentimental value only. It stated clearly, in contractual language drafted by Simone's own legal team, that Simone Ashford Carter relinquished any and all present and future claims to the aforementioned contents, in perpetuity, without condition. Marcus read it twice. Then he set the document down on Isabel's desk. Her words, Isabel confirmed, watching him. Her lawyer's language, reviewed and approved by Simone herself. They wanted to make absolutely certain you understood that she wanted none of your, and I am reading directly here, sentimental clutter. They were thorough about it. They were, Marcus agreed. In their eagerness to insult you completely, Isabel said. They constructed a legally airtight gift. She cannot challenge the archive. She cannot claim a share of the patent holdings. She cannot touch the land rights framework. She signed away everything she did not know existed, and she did it with enough contempt that the language leaves no room for ambiguity or appeal. Marcus nodded slowly. The Meridian Continental Fund, Isabel continued, opening a second folder. Their legal team responded at 6 o'clock this morning. They are prepared to formalize the partnership agreement and begin the rights activation process. Their senior director is flying to Atlanta personally. He wants to sign in person. Here, Marcus said, in this city. He would prefer your office. I do not have an office yet, Marcus said. Tell him we will use the Ashford Tower boardroom. Isabel looked up from the folder. Reginald Ashford's building, she said. The signing happens there, Marcus said, on their stage, inside the structure they built to remind people like me where we stand. He paused. It is a matter of symbolism, of architecture. The final act belongs in the room where they believe they have already won. Isabel was quiet for a moment, then she closed the folder. I will make the call, she said. The Ashford Tower boardroom occupied the 52nd floor of the most prominent commercial building in Midtown Atlanta. It was a room designed with one purpose, to make whoever sat on the wrong side of the mahogany table feel the full, gravitational weight of the Ashford name. One wall was entirely glass. On a clear morning, the Atlanta skyline spread below it in every direction. The dome, the towers, the arteries of the city moving in silence from this height. The opposite wall held an oversized commissioned painting, abstract and cold, the kind of art purchased to signal wealth rather than express anything human. Marcus and Isabel arrived at 9:45 in the morning. They did not hurry. They were escorted to the boardroom by an assistant who addressed Marcus with the faint, professional courtesy reserved for people whose purpose in the building was unclear. They took their seats. Marcus chose the chair with his back to the window, placing the Atlanta skyline behind him, forcing the room to look at him against the backdrop of a city he had spent his entire career studying, understanding, and learning to build for. They waited. At 10 o'clock exactly, the door opened. Simone entered first, wearing a sharp white suit, her posture carrying the rigid composure of someone performing confidence they no longer fully felt. Behind her came Reginald, broad, heavy, moving through the doorway with the physical certainty of a man who believed he owned every room he entered. Their attorney, a silver-suited man named Gerald Tate, followed, already opening his briefcase. They settled into their seats across the table. Reginald surveyed the room with the satisfied expression of a man reviewing his own kingdom. His eyes landed on Marcus and softened into that familiar, theatrical warmth, the warmth of a victor receiving a defeated opponent on home ground. "David," he said, then corrected himself immediately. "Marcus, good of you to come." The slip was deliberate, a small, casual erasure. Marcus said nothing. He folded his hands on the table. Gerald Tate slid the settlement folder across the mahogany surface. "All parties have reviewed the terms. We are here simply to execute. Mr. Carter, if you would turn to the final page." He uncapped a pen and placed it precisely beside the folder. Marcus looked at the folder. He did not open it. He did not reach for the pen. He let the silence extend past the point of comfort, past the point where Reginald shifted his weight in his chair, past the point where Simon's perfectly composed expression began to show the first hairline fracture of uncertainty. "Before I sign," Marcus said, his voice quiet and completely level, "there is a matter of an incorrectly categorized asset that needs to be addressed at this table." Simon's eyes narrowed. Reginald's jaw tightened. The room had changed. They did not yet know it. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds after Marcus spoke. Simone broke it first. Her voice carried the bright, brittle edge of someone who had rehearsed composure and was now watching it slip. "Marcus, please, do not make this theatrical. Whatever concern you have about the storage unit, you already know it is yours. We have been over this." "We have," Marcus agreed. "I simply want it reflected correctly in the room before we proceed." Reginald leaned forward, the gold cufflinks on his wrists catching the overhead light. "Son, the storage unit is in the agreement, signed, sealed, categorized. If you are trying to renegotiate at the 11th hour, let me tell you plainly it will not work. Not here, not today." "I am not renegotiating," Marcus said. "I am clarifying." Gerald Tate, the attorney, reached for his own copy of the settlement. "The contents of Unit 734 are categorized as personal effects of sentimental value only, with full relinquishment by." The boardroom door opened. It did not open loudly. It opened with the quiet, deliberate ease of a door held by someone who understood the weight of an entrance. The assistant who had escorted Marcus earlier held it from the outside. Through it walked a man. He was not tall. He was not physically imposing in any conventional sense. He was slender, perhaps 70 years old, dressed in a dark charcoal suit of extraordinary simplicity. His bearing carried the particular stillness of someone who had moved through enough rooms full of powerful people that the concept of intimidation had long since become irrelevant to him. Behind him walked 2 associates, a man and a woman, both carrying structured briefcases, both moving with the synchronized efficiency of people who worked at a level where time was the only truly finite resource. Reginald Ashford's eyes registered the man's face. The color did not drain from Reginald's face all at once. It left slowly, like water receding from a shoreline, leaving behind an expression Marcus had never seen on that face before, something between stunned recognition and the specific, nauseating vertigo of a man who has just understood that the room he believed he controlled has been operating under entirely different terms. The man's name was Solomon Adami. He was the founding chairman of the Meridian Continental Sovereign Fund, the most influential infrastructure investment entity operating across the African continent, and for 7 consecutive years, the single most sought-after meeting in international development finance. Reginald Ashford had placed 3 calls to Solomon Adami's office in the past 7 years. All 3 had gone unanswered. Solomon Adami crossed the room. His gaze passed over Reginald, over Simon, over Gerald Tate, passing over them the way a man's eyes pass over furniture when he is looking for a specific person in a room. His eyes found Marcus. He extended his hand. A slow, respectful inclination of his head accompanied it. "Mr. Carter," Solomon Adami said, "Atlanta suits you. I am glad we are finally in the same room." Reginald Ashford pushed back his chair and rose to his feet with the instinctive, urgent energy of a man whose survival instincts had just overridden his composure. He extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Adami, Reginald Ashford, this is extraordinary. I have admired the Meridian Fund's work for years. If I had known you were going to be here." Solomon Adami looked at the extended hand for a moment. He offered a short, measured nod. He did not take the hand. Reginald lowered his arm slowly. Solomon sat beside Marcus. His two associates opened their briefcases in synchrony and placed two bound documents on the table. One was the formal partnership and rights acquisition agreement, $67 billion in activated land rights and patent holdings, structured around the Quame-Osai framework, assigned to the entity now legally and exclusively held by Marcus Elijah Carter. Isabel Okafor spoke first, her voice unhurried. As my client indicated, there is an asset in this proceeding that was categorized incorrectly. The contents of storage unit 734, described in the settlement document before us as items of sentimental value only, have been formally appraised and legally established as the complete intellectual and physical archive of Quame-Os, including active patent holdings across 11 countries and land rights documentation directly tied to the Meridian Continental Development portfolio. The current total valuation of that asset is $67 billion. The number arrived in the room like a structural failure, slow at first, then total. Simone made a sound. It was small, involuntary, the sound of a breath leaving a body before the mind has time to instruct it to remain composed. Her hand, perfectly manicured, gripped the edge of the mahogany table. Her eyes moved from Solomon Adami to the documents to Marcus and back again, cycling through the calculation with a speed her expression could not conceal. Gerald Tate's pen was no longer in his hand. Reginald sat back down. The chair received him heavily. "That is impossible," he said. His voice had lost its boom. It was a quieter sound now, the sound of a man speaking from behind glass. "That is absolutely, you cannot, Marcus, you hid this. This is concealment. This changes everything. Clara, Simone should have access to." Section 7, paragraph B, Isabel said. She turned the settlement document around and slid it across the table to Gerald Tate, her finger resting on the relevant paragraph. "Drafted by your office. Reviewed and approved by your client. Her own language. Sentimental value only. Relinquishment unconditional in perpetuity." She paused. "Your client was very thorough." Simone's voice came in sharp and fractured. "That is not what I meant. I did not know. You knew, Marcus. You knew and you said nothing." Marcus looked at her. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet and carried no anger, only the steady, exhausted truth of a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time. "I never lied to you, Simone," he said. "You walked into that room and you told me what you saw, old paper and toys. I did not correct you because you had already decided. The value was always there. The only thing that changed today is that you can no longer afford to keep looking away from it." He picked up the pen. He signed the addendum first, the document reaffirming her relinquishment. Then he signed the divorce settlement. Then he set the pen down, flat and final, on the mahogany table. "My business in this room is concluded," he said. He looked briefly at Darius Ashford, Simone's younger brother, who had been seated near the window as a family witness throughout the entire proceeding and had not spoken a single word. Darius, who had watched every moment with the fixed, forward gaze of a man fighting a powerful internal current. Marcus said nothing to him. He simply held his eyes for 3 full seconds. Darius stood up. He looked at his father. He looked at his sister. Then he looked at the floor, and when he raised his head again, something in his expression had resolved into the clean, irreversible stillness of a decision made. "He is right," Darius said. "All of it, every word." He walked out. Marcus and Solomon Adami followed. The Ashfords remained in the glass room, alone, with the city spread below them like a world they no longer knew how to read. The months that followed were not loud. That was the part that surprised people who had expected Marcus Carter to become a different kind of man when the money came, louder, harder, draped in the visible armor of acquired status. He did not. He moved through his new life the way he had always moved through rooms, with attention, with restraint, with the particular patience of someone who understood that the most important structures take the longest to build correctly. The partnership with the Meridian Continental Sovereign Fund was announced through a joint press release issued from Atlanta and Nairobi on a Wednesday morning. The financial press covered it with the breathless energy of a story that had all the elements they loved: hidden legacy, dramatic revelation, a $67 billion asset nobody saw coming. The architectural and engineering press covered it with something closer to reverence. Quame-Osai's name, long whispered only in graduate seminars and technical journals, was now appearing on the front pages. Marcus let the noise move past him. He leased a studio space in a restored brick building in the old Fourth Ward, high ceilings, original timber, southern light coming in through windows tall enough to make the room feel like it had no ceiling at all. He hired 7 people, young engineers and designers whose reverence for meaningful work matched his own. They were not building luxury towers or vanity projects. Their first commission, funded through the Meridian Partnership, was a mixed-use community development in a neglected corridor of southwest Atlanta, affordable housing, a technical training center, green infrastructure, public gathering space. It was the kind of project Quaim Os had always believed in and never had the resources to build at scale. Marcus now had the resources. He was building Quaim's dream with Quaim's tools, in the city where Quaim had spent his final years in deliberate, patient silence. The Ashford family receded. Reginald's reputation in Atlanta's business community did not collapse dramatically. It eroded, slowly, in the way that reputations erode when the story people tell about you shifts from admiration to cautionary tale. The man who had offered a mailroom position to the person now managing a $67 billion asset portfolio became a recurring anecdote in certain rooms, said with laughter, but the kind of laughter that contains a lesson. Deals that once flowed to Reginald through relationships and trust now required additional scrutiny, additional proof. The aura of invincibility he had polished for 4 decades had been scratched, permanently in the one place it could not be repaired, the collective judgment of his peers. Simon sold the Buckhead house. The proceeds were real but not sustaining. Deshaun Okoye had moved on with the quiet efficiency of a man for whom association with the wrong story was a professional liability. Her social world, built entirely on the currency of status, had nothing left to trade in. She filed 2 attempts to reopen the divorce settlement through new attorneys. Both failed. Both cost her money she did not have to spare. Darius Ashford called Marcus on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. They met at a small restaurant in East Atlanta, far from either of their old orbits. Darius looked older than Marcus remembered, steadier. "I left the family firm," Darius said, "starting my own practice, small business consulting, the kind of work that actually helps people build something real." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "My father has not spoken to me since the boardroom. Simone calls sometimes. She still believes you took something from her." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She gave it away," he said, "freely and in writing and with great satisfaction. What she cannot forgive is that she did it herself." Darius nodded. He looked Marcus in the eye. "I hope you are at peace." "I am," Marcus said, and he meant it with every part of himself that had survived the years of silence, the public diminishment, the long, patient work of building something real inside a world that had decided he was nothing. He stood months later on the groundbreaking site of the Southwest Atlanta Community Development. The steel was beginning to rise. The site smelled of turned earth and raw timber and the particular mineral sharpness of concrete freshly poured. He held a rolled blueprint in his hand. In the lower corner of the plan, almost invisible unless you knew to look, was a small meditation garden. Its layout a deliberate, respectful echo of an unbuilt structure Quaim Osai had sketched on a Thursday evening many years ago, by lamplight, in a city far from Atlanta, dreaming of what could be. A promise kept, a legacy honored, a life not reclaimed but finally fully built. Marcus Carter stood in the morning light of his city and felt the particular, unshakable peace of a man who had never stopped building. Even when the world around him had been convinced there was nothing worth constructing. He had known the truth all along. The foundation was never broken. It was just waiting for the right moment to hold something worthy of its strength. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.